Well, now that I trust I've gained your undivided attention with that provocative, clickbaity episode title, please allow me to elaborate. Normally, when we hear the words worse than Watergate, it means CNN has dragged the corpse of Carl Bernstein out from mothballs, propped him in front of a camera, and promised him that he will not receive his full fee unless he uses the words worse than Watergate at least half a dozen times to describe whatever thing Donald Trump said or did yesterday that we are supposed to be completely outraged about. But how bad was Watergate really? Like, where does Watergate rank in terms of overall presidential malfeasance? And most importantly, for our purposes, how does it compare with Joe Biden serially absconding with top secret documents that he's not allowed to have in his possession, which he apparently has been doing for some decades now? If you ask the average American today what they know about Richard Nixon, the most common answer you will get is that he is the most evil, loathsome, crooked president of all time because, duh, Watergate, obviously. But then you ask them what they know about Watergate, and they'll say, wasn't there some sort of burglary or something like that? And there the knowledge ends, more often than not. So, as concisely as possible, let's give a quick refresher on what actually happened. Now, there were a few bumbling fools, and I call them bumbling fools since they were defeated by a minimum wage security guard and a piece of scotch tape, who were working as independent contractors for the RNC, and they hatched just about the dumbest plot in the history of dumb plots. Their objective was to get noticed by the president and hopefully get jobs in the White House during Nixon's second term, and they decided, rather bizarrely, that the best way of achieving this was to break into Democratic National Committee headquarters and steal documents that would reveal that the head of the DNC was actively receiving care from a psychoanalyst. And at this point, if you're thinking, wait, that's it? That's all there was? Yeah, that's it. And if you're thinking, how did these guys imagine that doing this was going to help the president gain re-election? The answer to that, I do not know. And I've talked before, more than once, about how Nixon could have made the entire thing go away simply by telling the truth in the beginning. I don't know who these guys are. I've never met these guys. They don't work for me. I didn't instruct them to break into anything. That is 24 simple words that would have forestalled the entire thing, and there would never have been any Watergate scandal. But, for reasons that were known only to himself, Nixon decides that the best play is to cover the thing up and try to pay these jokers $1 million to keep their traps shut. And you probably know more or less how the rest of the thing played out, but make no mistake. When I say the Watergate break-in was a silly, trifling thing that barely even registers on the historical rankings of presidential misbehavior, don't take that to mean that I'm saying Nixon shouldn't have resigned. He absolutely should have resigned, because he did consciously choose to break the law for inexplicable reasons, and that's the point at which his conduct becomes indefensible. He overreacted to something that didn't merit the overreaction. His paranoia got the best of him. But then the paranoia wasn't entirely unwarranted, since the media and the deep state were both very much out to destroy him for many, many years. And the result was that he made himself into a criminal and into a disgrace, which is quite the rapid downward spiral when you are less than 18 months removed from winning the most dominant victory in the entire history of presidential elections. But ever since 9 August 1974, Nixon and Watergate have been the gold standard of presidential scandals. And as you know, the news media have had half a century in which to portray themselves as the noble, courageous heroes of the peace, which they never were, but you know how it is, self-aggrandizer's gonna self-aggrandize. But Joe Biden, apparently ever since he was in the Senate, throughout his vice presidency, right into his presidency, has been sprinkling classified documents on the ground pretty much wherever he goes, like a slave girl tossing rose petals into the path of the king. There's been, either 4 or 5 distinct searches now, and each time there's a search, the searchers come up with another tranche of documents that Joe is not authorized to have in his possession. 2 houses, 1 office, and the headquarters of the Penn Biden Center for Fat Stacks of Chinese Cash. There are classified documents sprouting up freaking everywhere. It's like a mushroom patch after a heavy rain. And speaking of that, Do you guys think it's just a coincidence that half of the people in Joe's cabinet were formerly on the board of the Penn Biden Center for Daddy Needs a New Beach House? Yeah, me either. I'm sure there's no connection there. Don't mind me, I'm just talking crazy again. From atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where our portcullis is badly in need of replacement, if anybody happens to know any generous Chinamen who might be willing to help out in return for some national security secrets, good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And as you assuredly already know by now, there was a mass shooting in suburban Los Angeles the night before last, in which 10 people were initially killed at the crime scene, and an additional 11th victim expired just a short time ago today. And you don't need me to tell you how the fake news media and elected Democrats, as soon as they saw that all of the victims were Asian, they lived up to their name and did what fake news performance artists always do and do best. They just made shit up. And so practically before the bodies were done hitting the floor, everybody with a letter D next to their name started furiously tweet storming all of their usual race hustler platitudes and catchphrases that they love dragging out each time there is a mass shooting. And these people, they absolutely love mass shootings. It sounds like a harsh thing to say, and it is, but it's bloody well true. On the fake cable news channels, they act almost giddy when there is some mass casualty event that they think they can shape and mold into a story about violent white supremacist killers who have been radicalized by Tucker Carlson and Ben Shapiro. Which, of course, for our purposes means basically any mass casualty event anywhere. Remember when the BLM activist plowed his car into a Christmas parade in Kenosha? They managed to blame that one on white supremacy. And speaking of Kenosha, remember when the lily white teenager Kyle Rittenhouse dispatched 2 other equally lily white attackers who were attempting to murder him? They even managed to make that incident all about race. Remember when somebody found a piece of rope on the ground at the construction site where Barack Obama is building that billion-dollar monstrosity monument to his own ego? Well, that, of course, was quickly declared a racist hate crime, because of course it was! But at least there wasn't any hysterical overreaction in that case. I mean, all they did was parachute in every single detective in the entire Chicago PD, because it's not like they have any actual crimes to be investigating. There's only around 24 murders in Chicago each weekend. Then they shut down the entire site for the rest of the week so they could force all the workers to sit through some ridiculous woke diversity training class. Then they offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to the apprehension of the culprit, which, again, your city averages 24 murders per weekend. How about a $50,000 reward for one of those? Or is the piece of rope more important? Or am I just talking crazy again? And come to think of it, if I was the Chicago PD and I wanted to crack that case, I probably would start by interviewing all of the gay Nigerian weightlifters in the area. Just a hunch. The point being, it's one of the central tenets of American journalism in the 21st century that you must always race hustle first and ask questions later. And if the story winds up not comporting with the standard narrative as well as they hoped it would, well, then they just memory hole the entire thing and call you a conspiracy theorist if you ever mention it again. And this time has been no different, of course. Within 2 hours of the news of the massacre breaking, practically every congressional Democrat had pumped out their obligatory copy-pasted tweet about how, well, this is a powerful reminder that we need to stamp out white supremacy and stop anti-Asian hate. Except, whoopsie, it turns out the assailant was every bit as Asian as his victims were. And that really takes the life out of the party for the Dems and the media. But I repeat myself, because there is nothing that ruins their day quicker than having a potentially juicy, delicious racism story that winds up not panning out. Do they give a damn that 11 people got murdered in cold blood? Of course they don't. Those deaths only matter if they can be co-opted to serve the larger narrative that we're trying to push, which is that all white males are secretly racist spree killers at heart. And then the actual killer winds up ruining the whole thing by being a Chinese senior citizen. Don't you hate it when that happens? But it's not a total loss, because the California Assembly will take the opportunity, I guarantee you, to pass a bunch more idiotic gun control laws, for that is the standard procedure, as you know all too well. Even when you are already the most absurdly gun-controlled state in the entire union, if a mass shooting happens, well, it means you don't have enough gun control laws, obviously. And that story isn't the only way the corporate fake news media is covering itself in glory this week. The New York Times, the Gray Lady, the newspaper of record that never met a totalitarian regime it didn't like. They ran a guest editorial today by a woman who is thrilled, delighted even, that she had the help of the Chinese Communist Party in raising her American children when she had her family living in Shanghai. This woman's name is Heather Kay, and even by the tyrant-loving standards of the New York Times, this is a real piece of work, if you haven't seen it yet, and I want to prove it by reading out a few brief excerpts. Quote, "The girls' Chinese kindergarten lectured us on everything, including how many hours our daughters should sleep, what they should eat, and their optimal weight. Each morning, all of the students performed calisthenics in straight rows and raised China's red flag while singing the national anthem. Classroom windows were usually kept open to increase air circulation and prevent contamination by airborne illnesses, even during winter, when the kids would attend class wearing their coats." End quote. And don't worry, it gets a hell of a lot worse than that. Quote, "We sometimes felt as if our children were on loan to us for evenings and weekends to be delivered back to school each weekday. Constantly served up moral, historical, and cultural lessons on pulling together for the sake of the Chinese nation. Our girls came home discussing self-discipline, integrity, and respect for elders." End quote. Oh my God, I bet Tony Fauci was touching himself under the table while he read that. Quote, "With school delivering a solid work ethic and a total drive for academic excellence, my husband and I didn't need to push the girls to complete homework. The shame of letting their teachers and classmates down was enough to light their fires." End quote. Heather? I think that probably wasn't the actual source of the fear that you observed. It was much more likely the prospect of corporal punishment that did it, or the prospect of being locked in a damp concrete cell for 8 hours, being made to watch Chairman Mao's greatest hits on an eternal loop, and if you keep misbehaving even after that, then they ship you off to the Nike factory and chain you to a sewing machine for 20 hours a day, making Colin Kaepernick jerseys. And it gets more horrifying still, believe it or not. Quote, "Raising kids in China was a plus in other ways, such as the heavy censorship, which results in a kid-friendly internet and national limits on how much time young people can spend playing online video games." End quote. In other words, if you are a totally worthless, derelict parent who can't be bothered monitoring your child's internet use, well, the problem isn't with you. The problem is with not enough government censorship. Because, damn it, I should be able to hand my kids an internet-enabled smartphone, disappear all day, and then come home that night secure in the knowledge that the brutal authoritarian regime has kept my little kiddies safe from harmful online content. So why in America do we have an epidemic of adolescent and even pre-adolescent children binge-watching hardcore pornography? Duh, because we don't have enough communism. And I still haven't got to the worst of it. Not by a long shot, actually. Check this shit out. Quote, "Ironically, the tight control of the Communist Party surveillance state results in its own kind of freedom. With crime and personal safety concerns virtually eliminated, our daughters were riding the subway unsupervised in a city of around 26 million people from the age of 11, end quote. Now, can you imagine, first of all, ever thinking things like that in the first place? And can you imagine writing them down? And then can you imagine submitting it for publication in one of the world's most prominent newspapers? A piece where the crux of your thesis is basically, communism makes it so convenient to be a terrible parent. The Communist Party is like a free babysitter. It's awesome. And yeah, there's still more to go, so strap yourself in. Quote, "A constant but mostly benign police presence kept order. Streets and the green spaces around every corner were kept immaculate, and the sense of civic pride was palpable." End quote. Because what? It's impossible to sweep the street and cut the freaking grass without Marxist totalitarianism? Is that how that rationale works? And about this civic pride of which you speak, I feel like our friend Heather doesn't understand how communism actually works. Do you think maybe everybody tries to act happy and prideful because doing anything else could be perceived as political dissent, punishable by being bundled into a white van and shipped off to some fucking prison camp? How can a person have actually lived under Chinese communism and still be so impossibly naive about its true nature? I wonder also how much her attitudes are informed by the fact that she always had the option of leaving and returning to the United States. It's a common thread, seemingly, among all people who say they are fans of communism. You don't hear that much hooray for communism talk coming from people who are forced to live under that system and do not have the option of emigrating. You ever wonder why that is, Heather? Nah, you probably didn't. You don't strike me as the most inquisitive woman in the world, is all I'm saying. Okay, final excerpt. Quote, "The punishing COVID lockdown in Shanghai that began in late March of last year kept us confined at home for 2 months, dependent at times on government food rations. We had already made the difficult decision to leave China after nearly 3 years of being unable to see our families, largely because of Chinese pandemic restrictions, and we moved to Washington, D.C. last June." End quote. Well, I guess if you're reluctantly leaving communist China and looking for the nearest match in America, Washington, D.C. is probably your best option for communism light. Although, in China's defense, I have very little doubt that the Shanghai public school system probably provides a better education than the Washington, D.C. public schools do. So, what a great week thus far for the fake news media, and it is only Monday. So much journalisming already, and again, even for the New York Times, which has a very long and distinguished track record of utterly detesting human liberty. I feel like some sort of fake news Rubicon has been crossed here when they are now running columns that are openly cheerleading for communist authoritarianism as a great system in which to raise American children. In a certain sense, it might be the most honest thing the Times has ever done, because they ain't pretending anymore, are they? We sparkly heart communism, they say. So I guess it's official now, which is good to know. And this isn't so much a slipping of the mask as it is the wearer simply ripping the mask off altogether to reveal the smiling, bushy, bearded face of Mr. Karl Marx. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, very much indeed for watching. And if you have a moment to spare, do me a favor and check to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I am not explicitly accusing YouTube of any shenanigans or malfeasance here. I just can't think of any organic explanation for why I lose exactly 2 subscribers each and every time I gain 5. Call me a conspiracy theorist if you must. See you Wednesday. Have a pleasant tomorrow. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.